Alcoholic spouse, an alcoholic wife, husband, partner? Well, if so, then you probably know how frustrating it is to hear them minimize the problem, to hear them say that you're the one that's overly critical or that you're making too big of a deal about it. But stay tuned, because in this video, I am going to explain to you why alcoholic denial is worse than other addictions. I mean, alcoholic denial is way worse than someone's denial about heroin or cocaine or meth. And you might be thinking, but Amber, those are way harder drugs. How can alcoholic denial be way worse than that? Well, don't worry, just keep watching and you're going to find out the answer. For those of you who are new here, I'm Amber Hollingsworth, Master Addiction Counselor and founder of Hope for Families Recovery Center, and you're watching Put the Shovel Down, the YouTube channel dedicated to helping families understand the science and psychology of addiction so you can recover your loved ones and your life and get back on track. So if that sounds like something you need to do, consider subscribing, and I'll make sure you have every tool and piece of information you need to get that job done. Okay, so I promise to tell you why alcoholic denial is worse than other addiction denial. You see, here's the thing. When people are doing drugs like cocaine and heroin and methamphetamine, they may deny to you that something's a problem, but deep down inside, they really do know it's a problem for themselves. They just don't want to admit it to you out loud because they're scared of stopping, or because they don't want to stop, or they're fearful about what life will be like if they have to stop, or they're fearful of withdrawals. So denial for them, they may deny it to you, but they probably on some level get that it's a problem for themselves. Occasionally they'll minimize that problem or make it seem less than what it really is to themselves, but with alcohol it seems to be a whole different story, and here's why. You see, because alcohol is a central nervous system depressant, fancy for shuts down your thinking brain, or what I call takes your filter off. What happens when most people have an alcohol problem is they drink and or use other drugs with the drinking to the point that they end up in a blackout. And so alcohol particularly distorts your memory process. People either don't remember at all what they did or how bad it was, or they remember little pieces of it. And even if they do remember the whole thing, their memory of the event and what happened has this weird filter over it that makes them not remember the situation the same way you remember it. Like an Instagram filter. It changes the whole thing. And so when I deal with alcoholics, you can almost count on the fact that they're going to tell me some version of, it's not that bad. This other person is overreacting. It's probably because their mother had a problem and they're just projecting that on me. They're going to tell you some version of that. Now, they may admit to you that there was like this time or two where things got away from them, but overall, they really are quite clueless about how bad those situations really were. So they tend to stay in denial longer. And this is a really delicate situation. You can't just go in there and rip that sort of denial layer off the top and say, oh, let me tell you how bad it is. Because I have had family members in the past to do things like make videos and show it to the person. But even when you do that, usually the person feels so humiliated and embarrassed, they have those other defense mechanisms that immediately kick in about defensiveness, about you're recording me, you're trying to trap me, and then they get stuck on those thoughts instead of the thoughts about what actually happened in the video. So the issue about helping people break through denial is complicated. Have you seen that movie Shrek? Where Ogre says, ogres are like onions, we have layers. Denial is like ogres, it has layers. So it's important in how you go about dealing with that denial. The first thing you might want to understand is that someone does not have to admit the severity of the issue in order to make a change. They just have to get to a point where they realize that at this moment, for whatever reasons, they need to make a change. They don't have to like it, they don't have to want it, they just have to be willing to do it. So if you have a loved one in your life who's in alcoholic denial, stop trying to force them to say how bad it is, because the more you try to force them to be honest and admit to themselves just how bad this problem is, the worse it's going to get. The more defense mechanisms they're going to get, the more they're going to project and blame and minimize. You know the story. Oftentimes, as people get sober and they work their recovery program, they become more and more and more able to see how bad the problem was and to admit to how bad the problem was. But sometimes they need a little sobriety. They need to step back from the situation long enough and far enough to really be able to see how bad it was. So that's part of it, is stepping back enough to see how bad it was. And second part of that is they need to have enough ego strength to be able to see it and admit it and acknowledge it to themselves and maybe to other people without totally falling apart and crumbling. Think about it like this. I bet you've made really big mistakes in your past that at the time while you were making them or shortly after, you felt really embarrassed and horrible about, and you probably didn't want to talk about it, and you definitely didn't want to tell anybody about it. But now maybe you're years past that. Think about when you were a teenager and things you did that you wish you wouldn't have done. You would have been horrible. You wouldn't have admitted it to anybody. But now when you look back and you say, oh, when I was a teenager, I did this and that and the other, because you don't have your whole identity all wound up in who you were at that moment. And so you have more ego strength, and plus you know that teenagers do all kind of dumb stuff. So you're able to really admit to just how big that mistake was. It's kind of like that. So stop trying to force your loved one to say just how bad it is. Focus on trying to get them to be willing, and not like it, to make a change. And I know what you're thinking, well, Amber, how do we do that? Well, that's a long, complicated answer, but don't worry, I've got a path for you. And this video right here is your next step in that journey. Hi, I'm addiction specialist Amber Hollingsworth, here to bring you the 5 most important signs of a functional alcoholic. And what I mean when I say functional alcoholic is someone that has a drinking problem but still, at least seemingly from the outside, is functioning well. Generally they have a job or they're going to school and it looks like life is going on like it should be. But on the inside, things are definitely going wrong. It's important to remember that a functional alcoholic is really only one step away from a non-functional alcoholic. All right, let's begin with symptom number 1. If you're a functional alcoholic, you probably have a hard time relaxing and enjoying yourself without a little bit of alcohol on board. That could look like it's hard to really enjoy or play with your kids without alcohol. That could look like if you're a college student, if the event doesn't involve drugs or alcohol, you're really not interested in going, and the thought of going to a movie or going bowling without drinking or using something just sounds lame. And you think, why would anybody even want to do that? That doesn't even sound fun. Because you see, people with substance use disorders slowly and gradually lose the ability to experience fun and joy from everyday activities that don't involve the substance. Let's move on to sign number 2 of functional alcoholism. Sometimes when you wake up in the morning, you can't quite remember what happened the night before. And times you're really kind of scared to look at your phone, worried about what text messages you sent. And as you're going through your day, you're sort of sitting on edge, hoping someone doesn't come up to you and tell you some crazy, embarrassing thing that you did the night before. If that's happening to you, then you're having blackouts, which is a major symptom of alcoholism, so pay attention to that one. Number 3, this might be the most important one that I'm going to tell you about. You see, functional alcoholics and addicts will oftentimes make promises to themselves and to other people that they will cut down, control, or stop their drinking. Guess what? People that don't have drug or alcohol problems don't have conversations like that. They don't make promises like that. They don't wonder to themselves, am I an alcoholic, and watch videos about, am I an alcoholic? That really just doesn't occur to you unless you're having some level of an alcohol problem. So if you're watching this video trying to figure out if you're having an alcohol problem, that's a good indicator that it's highly possible. You know, oftentimes when we first get involved with a family and people are in this stage of it where they're sort of trying to see if they can cut it back or manage it or limit it, a lot of times it looks like, well, I'm just going to drink on the weekends, or I'm just going to drink on special occasions, or I'm not going to drink more than 4 beers ever. And to be honest, a lot of the times you're able to stick with that. But sometimes, even though that's what you intended to do or drink, it just doesn't work out that way. And when the dam breaks, it really breaks. And a lot of times that results in one of those mornings where you wake up and you're wondering, like, oh my gosh, what did I do the night before? And you're totally embarrassed and you're walking around just waiting for someone to come up and tell you something totally humiliating and embarrassing. Not fun, right? I think it's important to understand that having alcoholism on any level, functional or not, doesn't really mean that you have to drink every day all the time, but more it means you have a hard time stopping once you start. And you often cross your own limits or promises or boundaries that you set for yourself and or have told other people. And that kind of leads me to symptom number 4. A lot of times there's a lot of people in your life that don't think anything at all. You seem like you have it together. The people at church, maybe your colleagues at work or school. But the people closest to you usually are the first ones to start to recognize these symptoms. And first it starts just by making noticing statements to you. And then they start to get frustrated with you. And then the people closest to you actually start to ask you to change, or maybe even give you some ultimatums to change. That really starts to escalate as alcoholism progresses. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, no one else thinks I have a problem. But we're talking about the people closest to you, the ones that you really can't fool, the ones that see you all the time. Now be careful, because you might be having a thought like this. Many of the alcoholics that I see will often tell me about this, this loved one that's really close to them that thinks they have a problem. They'll tell me why that person's opinion doesn't count. So they want to disqualify why that person doesn't count. And it usually looks something like this. Usually looks like, oh gosh, she just thinks it's such a big problem because her father was an alcoholic and now she thinks everyone's an alcoholic. Or it looks like, oh, my mom, she is so uptight. Like no one else's mom is like that. She's just always freaking out and reacting about everything. So be careful. If the people around you, the ones that are close to you, your friends and your family, are saying something to you about it, Listen to them. Don't disqualify it. I know there's a reason why you can disqualify why this person's opinion doesn't count and that person's opinion doesn't count, but usually, whether you like it or not, they're looking out for you because they care about you, and you do need to stop and listen. And all of those things lead me to sign or symptom number 5. You avoid conversations about your drinking. You really try hard not to engage in this topic of discussion. And in fact, you might even be sneak drinking. So you know that loved one that's closest to you that's like always on your case and bothering you and thinks you have a problem, but you think their opinion doesn't count. So you might let them see that you're drinking a little bit, you know, like a couple of beers here, you order a glass of wine at dinner, but secretly you're drinking more behind their back. You've got a bottle hidden in the garage or under the seat in the car or any number of places, or in your coat jacket at the fancy restaurant. So when your wife goes to the bathroom, you sneak an extra drink, or you walk up to the bar and take an extra shot while she's gone. Sneak drinking, that's a pretty big one. You really have to pay attention to that. And be careful, because denial is powerful. And just like you'll disqualify those people that are saying something to you, you'll have every reason in the world why you're doing that sneaking. Maybe you're doing that sneaking because you just want to avoid the argument, or you just don't want to get someone upset. Whatever the reason, you have to pay attention to these symptoms. If you're having a hard time enjoying yourself without alcohol, if you're often breaking your own boundaries and limits, if the people closest to you are upset about your drinking, if you sometimes forget things from the night before and you really hate to talk about it all, you might have a problem. You know, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but the sooner you can look at this issue, the easier and faster that you can address it and get it under control. You know, I like to say, you really don't have to wait until you hit a bottom to solve this problem. Unfortunately, most people do, because when they're in that functional level, it's not that they can't stop, it's more that they won't stop. So don't let that happen to you. If you really identified with some of these things that we talked about, you might want to take a deeper look into the issue. I'm going to suggest that you check out my video on the 3 thinking patterns of an alcoholic. And as always, make sure that you subscribe to this channel, because if this video was helpful, there's tons and tons